Hey bookworms, let's have a dialogue. If you're new here, welcome. Every day we're picking either a short story, a poem, or an essay to read and discuss. And in tandem with this, I've been publishing a new short story for the past 8 weeks to my website, thewriterwithacause.com. So if you're curious about that, link in the description. Now, both of these tasks aren't just for my own benefit, they're for you too. It's my hope that the combination of this channel and the website, thewriterwithacause.com, can help create a community of us that enjoy reading as well as writing, and enjoy reading in the effort to become better writers. Because that's really the best way to become a better writer, right? To read more, but not just to read more, to understand what we're reading on multiple levels. So that's what we're doing here. So if that's something you're interested in, I don't know, maybe you want to stick around. So today we're going to break down The Genius in Thinking Socratically by Sharon Schwartz and Harvey Leip. Specifically, we're just breaking down chapter 1 in this text. Let's do it. One must remember that rational dialogue means keeping the dialogue open. What? Right? Seems so simple, right? But in the context of writing, because that really is our main context here, to write stories rooted in what is reasonable to each story that we set out to tell. And by that I just mean, whatever circumstance your particular tale is set out in, whether it's fantasy, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is, we want it to be rooted in the reasonableness of that world that you're building. So I have 3 different ways that this could come about in your writing process and world building creation. Okay, first, your character could be in conflict with their inner dialogue or their conscience. We see some of this in Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. Ryland definitely does not want to go to space to save humanity. Not at all. Second example of this is your character could be in conflict with another character, which is a pretty common thing that we see in literature. This could be your character versus an antagonist or a morally gray character. And I think the fun there for you, the writer, is figuring out what their common assumption, more on that a little bit later, what their common assumption is between them, and then when they diverge. So say we have a basic hero-villain arc. Let's say they both want what's best for society, but they both have different modes of going about it. So they're working off the same assumption of they want what's best for society. They may differ about what is best for society, but theoretically, since they share a common base want or base truth, you could theorize that there are certain paths that would lead them into an agreement. What those paths are is up to you. And then the third and perhaps most interesting way you could use this strategy, at least I think, is with yourself as you're writing, aka thinking Socratically. Authors Schwartz and Leip discuss this very phenomenon of self-reflection. We must carry on the open dialogue with ourselves through thinking. They go on to argue, reasoning is a dialogue, and good reasoning means first and foremost keeping the dialogue open. When we're willing to keep the dialogue of our story open and developing as we acquire new knowledge or understanding of our goals and moral message, we'll inevitably write clearer stories because we won't be stagnating ourselves in old beliefs. I think when you sit down to think and write something as complex as a novel, it's kind of inevitable that at least one of your opinions are going to change about whatever it was that before you sat down to write by the time that you write the very final word. And just an important side note here, when I'm talking about moral message, I'm strictly referring to the idea that all literature circles around a specific moral takeaway. So there's this great podcast called Script Notes, but they have this one episode where they use Finding Nemo. They argue the moral message or takeaway in Finding Nemo is that part of loving someone is being able to let them go. And you're letting them go while being able to acknowledge that the world's a dangerous and scary place. And, Marlin, as the father figure, as the father to Nemo. This is the realization, or the journey that he goes through in Finding Nemo, where he has to just trust that he has instilled enough knowledge and taught Nemo enough that he'll be able to take care of himself and face these challenges when they cross his path in life. And that's what happens. But of course, Finding Nemo isn't the only place where we see a moral takeaway from a story. The idea of having a moral takeaway for your reader is something that author Ray Bradbury talks about in one of his lectures, which is also linked below. And I just bring that up because he is the inspiration for not only this video, but all the videos before and after, where I'm diving into specific texts like this. So yeah, check that out. And just one other note on moral messages while we're here. The moral message could be something really simple, like treat others the way you want to be treated. I think it's important to have that simplicity there, because then the complexity comes in the story you tell, in the character's journey to that message. So, food for thought. I really want to impress upon you one of the key, what I see as the key takeaways in this first chapter of Thinking Socratically, and that is the importance of keeping the dialogue open, whatever that dialogue may be. When we close down discussion, what we're doing is we're closing off ourselves to a larger web of understanding and therefore connection with others. And in the case of our writing, this is really important, because when we close off ourselves, we're closing off our characters and therefore our story's ability to reach its fullest potential. And when you think about it, it's a larger audience too. Reading this has really cemented the idea in my mind of, why not explore the antithesis of your argument? Whether you're writing an academic paper or a novel or nonfiction, it's kind of a key part of beefing up your own argument, because when you can go in, it's easy to shove the antithesis into a dark corner in the room of your book, somewhere in the room of your mind. But when we bring that out into the light, shake its hand and be its friend, like Socrates suggests in the beginning of this text, I think we strengthen our argument and we pull more people over to your line of reasoning. It can really reinforce your message. We've talked about what reasoning can do and some of the ways that it can be helpful for us writers, but where does all this reasoning stem from? Well, according to our authors, our reasoning must begin by assuming something. In the earlier pages of this chapter, we're given an excerpt from the infamous Euthyphro, written by Plato, which portrays a conversation between Socrates and Euthyphro. Now, an important context for this story is this conversation takes place while Socrates is in the midst of being put on trial in court for impiety, and this ultimately leads to his death. I think that strengthens the lesson of Euthyphro, because this is an honest-to-goodness attempt on Socrates' part to examine all the different angles of, okay, what is piety, what is impiety? But what it's really doing is showing us how to work through different reasoning processes. So, for our purposes, I've pulled one of Socrates' really simple examples of what reasoning assumptions could be. He's talking to Euthyphro here, so it's a conversation between the two of them. Their conversation is becoming very circular because Euthyphro really can't give Socrates a specific definition of what piety or impiety is. Socrates says this: if you and I were to disagree as to whether one number were more than another, would that make us angry and enemies? Should we not settle such a dispute at once by counting? So the assumption that the two would be working off of here is that the sequential order of numbers on the number line is a universally accepted belief of fact. It's based on the assumption that 1 comes before 2, and then 3 comes after 2, and so on and so forth. And it's based off of this assumption that Socrates and Euthyphro would be able to settle their dispute of any number's value by simply turning to their shared belief in the number line and counting. So it's a direct display of being able to measure facts based off a common assumption or belief. Here's the catch. Now we understand this base for the structure of reasoning. This is also considered one of the limits of reason, after all. Sometimes our disagreements are rooted in different ideas about where to start. If we can't agree that 2 is bigger than 1, then we have no common ground, we have no common assumptions, and we have no base to launch off of to eventually, hopefully, reach an agreement. And then we start getting into circular reasoning, which is pretty much what happens in the example that Schwartz and Leip give us with Socrates and Euthyphro. This is where our authors offer the application of reason does not always solve our problems. That's one limiting factor. A second limiting factor of reasoning is time. I hear it's finite. And the argument here is if we don't have enough time to work through all the angles and origins of an argument, that it's conceivable we could just dialogue endlessly and never actually reach an agreement. When thinking about this in the context of writing, we aren't necessarily so strictly limited. I mean, certainly this guy wasn't. Looks like he had a lot of time on his hands. This poet, the wonderful, marvelous Emily Dickinson, her constraint was her lifespan. She wrote profusely. And of course, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, I use these as props just to get the point across that we are a little bit more flexible with the idea of time. We can sit and stir in an idea and work through different reasonings for hours and hours and hours and days and days and days and weeks and weeks and weeks and months and years. But of course, we are ultimately plagued, just like everybody else, with a finite unit of time to create and learn and reason. Knowing this, I decided to turn to yesterday's spotlight author, Christine de Pizan, who says, I turned to those deductions of science I was able to comprehend in the time I had for study. And I returned to her because I think it's in the spirit of this whole project that we're doing here. I think it makes sense to give a nod to the previous day's author's insight, a key insight from that, and tie it into the current day's lesson. We're ultimately taking the knowledge of these authors and applying it to our end goal of becoming better writers, which really isn't an end goal, it's just kind of an ongoing, forever process. Now that we know that our time here is limited, I just want to leave you with one final thought. I think as writers, we should keep in mind that we don't have to have the final answer on any one subject when setting out to write. It's enough to add your drop of water into the vast ocean of ideas that are already set in motion. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.